Bonjour, and welcome to the Get Out the Vote live stream. My name is Levi Rickert. I'm a proud citizen of the Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation, founder and publisher of Native News Online. This year, Native News Online has done comprehensive coverage of the 2024 election. And so we're excited to have you join us tonight as we dive into the importance of exercising your right to vote in the American system. With crucial elections just around the corner, your voice matters more than ever. And let me introduce you to our political editor, Neely Bardwell. And what do you have to say, Neely?
Hi, bonjour. I am Neely. I'm the political editor for Native News Online. And so in June, we acknowledged the 100th anniversary of the Indian Citizenship Act, which is also known as the Snyder Act, which supposedly granted Native Americans the right to vote. Even with the act, though, it took some states until the 1950s to allow Native Americans the right to vote. So, to quote Secretary of Interior Deb Haaland, the first Native American to serve in a secretarial role in the president cabinet, voting is sacred.
And yes, so over the next couple of sessions, part one this week and part two next week, we'll be discussing the Native communities, how Native communities can make an impact, the important work being done on the ground, and everything you need to know to get prepared for Election Day. First, we want to take a few minutes to talk about our poll results, and I'm going to welcome Aaron Payment, Dr. Aaron Payment, who is a tribal council member of the Sault Ste. Marie. He's former first vice president of the National Congress of American Indians. And Neely and I, today we're publishing our results of a poll that we've done. It was a comprehensive poll that actually covered Indian country, all sections of Indian country, including Alaska and Hawaii. And we have 860 respondents. And so we're going to talk about the results. And I invited Dr. Payment on this segment because he actually is an expert on stats, and he is tremendous way of using data to really get points across. And he's done that in Washington very effectively because the federal government tells the numbers. And I will say this, as the editor of Native News Online, as a journalist, data collection in Indian country is very, very challenging, very difficult. And so with this, just speaking in terms of the poll results, the methodology was we actually worked with somebody at the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern University down in Evanston, Illinois. And 4 years ago, we did a poll. It was an internal poll, and it was Native News Online readers. This time, Dr. Hirsch from Northwestern and Medill School convinced me that we need to go with a third party to really get a better results of Indian countries, not just Native News Online. And I will say this, that the results show that only 38% of the people polled were in fact Native News Online readers. So I've told my staff that tells me we have opportunity to get all the other non-natives who don't read Native News Online to come and read us. And then Dr. Hirsch assured me, he said, if the New York Times captured 38% of the white people in America, they'd be very thrilled, and they're not. So he said, actually, you're doing pretty well, Levi. So with that, I want to talk about the results and and let me also stipulate and make this comment. This is actually the second poll, even though it'll be shown as the first poll, and we've described it in the article, but the week we were going to release the results of our first poll, President Joe Biden withdrew from the presidential race. So the professor called me and he said, you do know those numbers are obsolete now. And I said, yes, I know. I'm very aware of that. We spent the money and we engaged with Qualtrics, and it's used throughout the United States by many organizations, including colleges, universities, corporations, to gather the information. And but even with that, as I mentioned, it's challenging in Indian country to collect data. And what we found is there are some people like to self-identify with Native Americans, but further dig, dive into the results, Neely and I were able to ascertain some of the people were, as the professor calls them, pranksters. So we eliminated a good almost 200 people who filled it out because we determined they were in fact not Native Americans. So it's very challenging, and we're trying to be as accurate as possible. Even as in our everyday reporting, we want to be accurate because I tell our staff that Native Americans, we've been lied about so often. We don't want to be party to that. We want to be as accurate as possible. And so with that, Neely, tell me what your thoughts on, before we announce this first round of who people want in Indian country to be president. What's your take on the methodology that we use?
Well, I do want to say in our survey, this one that we're going to be releasing, we were able to survey over 230 tribes. And so that number, I'm just going to give a little bit of context into that number. It was, some people put Ojibwe, some people would put Potawatomi. And so we counted that as a tribal identity. Like a different tribal identity, whereas someone may have identified as just Sioux, or maybe identified as like Laguna Pueblo, etc. So we were able to survey over 230 tribes. As far as states go, we were able to receive respondents from 47 total states. Unfortunately, in this survey specifically, we didn't receive any responses from Arkansas, Delaware, and New Hampshire.
And let me interrupt. We also know that there are no federally recognized tribes in those 3 states. So,
but overall, we were able to get a good comprehensive survey. We had a good distribution of people who identified as Native American, Native Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian as well. So we did receive respondents from each of those different indigenous groups, so that we were able to get a broad perspective of Indian country across that outside of just the 48 contiguous states. So overall, I would say everybody knows that surveying Indian country is difficult. It is difficult to get a very accurate description, portrayal of what all of us think, because not all of us are a monolith. It's also very hard to reach in the deepest places of Indian country, maybe the places that have limited access to Wi-Fi or service that couldn't, access our survey. But overall, I would say that Native News Online, in collaboration with Qualtrics, did a very good job of finding Native people to survey and getting a good perspective of where Indian country is at when it comes to the election.
Well, and Dr. Payman, I want to bring you in because I mentioned you have expertise in this area, and what do you think about the process as you know it to be, as if you have observed and actually provide some consultation to the process for us? So, I guess in these days with polls, you really wonder about the validity of polls. So, even the national polls that show the elections so very, very close, I'm wondering what was their methodology, because now that I have been through this process, it's a rigorous process. So just kind of give you your top overview of what you've seen and how we try to approach this for accuracy.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm a real data nerd, and I take pride in saying that. I have had over 30 doctoral level credits in statistics and research, mainly because I studied for a doctorate in political science before I got elected, and then let those courses evaporated, and I finished up in education. So I've had a lot of experience with data crunching, data analysis. And so one of the things is that these national surveys do not at all capture Indian preferences, and mostly because we are a small population. We're only up to 5 million people in the country. And so too often we get relegated to the small n problem, small population. There's a solution to that, and that's called oversampling. And so one of the things that this university did was they did oversample. So we're very heavily represented in the sample, and that's hard. That's hard work to do. So this is a very good survey for people to pay close attention to. I'd also say that we are a microcosm of the societies in which we live. So a lot of American Indian people, the majority, live in rural or suburban areas. And often we represent the values in the communities in which we live. We had the experience of historical trauma, boarding schools, and missionaries. And so a lot of American Indians today are legacies of the effect of missionaries and Christian values and fit tightly within those sort of values. However, what we have seen in 2020 and what we're seeing now is that if an American Indian can understand their interest and what's at stake for them politically, they will vote a sovereignty ticket. And so we use that term to represent issues that impact American Indian tribes, both their tribal nations and also us as individual Indian citizens. Issues of jurisdiction, murdered and missing Indigenous persons, healthcare, a lot of those issues we have seen that Indian people will cross party lines and they will vote in their own interest. So I always joke that former president of NCAI, Jefferson Keel, says, do we participate R for Republican, D for Democrat, or I for Indian? And we can pick and choose what we would like to represent our interest and prioritize tribal issues first and foremost. So the methodology, I think, is sound. It's better than most of what you're going to see. Because mostly you're not even seeing American Indians being polled at all. So this is very important data. And you took it at really 3 points in time. The data collected leading up to President Biden stepping aside, and then pre and post debate for Harris versus Trump and all the other candidates that are not going to represent more than 1 or 2% of the total population. So it's really a two-person race between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. And so hopefully we can shed some light on what we're hearing in that data.
Yeah, and so I will announce the results, and we'll have a little graph come up that says Donald Trump is leading Harris in this poll 44.88% to 37.44%. And to our viewers, depending on who you want to vote for, you need to take note of these numbers. And we have another poll that is being taken as we speak, and those results will be out next week and certainly before the election. So Donald Trump is leading in Indian country at this current time, and according to this poll, and I think in Dr. Payne, you alluded to some of the issues that people vote for. I just want to switch over to the issues of what Native Americans felt are very important to them during this election cycle. And the number one issue is high prices and inflation. And interesting enough, that is in complete sync with what the general population is saying, is that inflation and high prices probably the number one issue in America right now. So Native Americans are very consistent that way. Then you have jobs in the economy, number two, and then the Native American issues, which we're going to break that down in the next slide. But however, I do want to point out that another big issue that is before the electorate this year is the woman's right to choose. And the way we position this issue is we gave two options, and one was pro-choice, which means that it does give the woman the right to decide. And then we have pro-life, and that was the anti-abortion issue. And then, so I do want to recognize that in Indian country, pro-choice is very, very high. After Native American issues, immigration, healthcare, here comes the the pro-choice, and so then it's actually number 6 in the list. And so, talking about Native American issues, I go to that tab. We have protection of sacred sites, and second is tribal sovereignty. Missing and murdered indigenous relatives is number 3. Health equity, then tribal water settlement rights. And one thing that we notice is that in the water settlement rights, the issue is not so big to Native Americans, we'll say in the Great Lakes, as it would be in the America's Southwest, or even like the state of Montana, where there are still active settlements that are being decided. And there's actually 3 that the Navajo Nation is very hopeful will be presented and passed through the lame duck Congress after the election. So I just think that's interesting. And Neely, what's your thoughts on the Native American issues? And is the number 3rd item what Native Americans say when they go into the voting booth? That's what they're concerned with, Native American issues, which as a Potawatomi person, I love that we should be voting, as Dr. Payment said, that tribal sovereignty ticket. And it's not necessarily R, not necessarily the D, but it's what candidate is going to really work on behalf of these issues that we have. And so, Neely, why don't you give your opinion on this, and then we'll go to Dr. Payment.
Well, Levi, in the poll, we did ask the question of who the respondents thought that which candidate would take better care of Indian country's issues. And Trump was still leading in that, but it was only by 1%. So he was leading by 40.9, and Harris received 39.2%. But there was a considerable amount of people who said neither or not sure. That was 20% of respondents who said that. So we are still seeing the consistent trend of Trump leading in the polls. There are people, the respondents at least, who believe that Trump would better serve Indian country if he got elected, as opposed to Kamala Harris. But as you see, protection of sacred sites is the leading issue for Native people who responded to our survey, to our poll. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that overall we're seeing we are people whose land was stolen, and we are seeing the rise in the land back movement. People, or tribes looking to regain their land. State parks are being given back to the tribes, like in Minnesota, things like that. But there's also sacred sites that are being threatened by oil pipelines, by mining, by just over extraction in general. And I think that's what a lot of Native people are worried about, because I think Indian country fears that the government doesn't respect a lot of our sacred sites, and that has been shown through certain decisions. Trump, when he was president, rolled back some of the most environmental protections. And in Project 2025, they want to repeal the Antiquities Act, which does provide some protection for sacred sites. I don't know, Aaron, if you wanted to speak a little bit more to that, and kind of explain a little bit why protection of sacred sites is scoring so high, right above tribal sovereignty.
Yeah, I'll add. So it's puzzling because for somebody who follows federal Indian policy my whole career, what we've seen in the last 3.5 years is record amounts of resources that have hit Indian country under the Biden-Harris administration. So, the question comes up, what's going on? What's the phenomena? Why, when we poll Indian people, are they rating Trump as preferable to Harris? And I think there's a communication issue. First of all, American Indians are distrustful of government. And we have good reason to be, because of the not honoring the treaties, and then the boarding school experience, and then taking our children away at rate 17 times that of non-Indian kids. That's why ICWA was initially enacted in 1978. the Religious Freedom Act in 1978. So I think the broader phenomena is you're picking up on this distrust of the federal government by American Indians. We don't have a great relationship with the federal government in the past. But if you take a look at some of the things that on this scale here that are very important to American Indians, the Biden administration, Obama Biden administration, took land into trust in Alaska, the first time ever in the last year of that administration. And the Trump administration took that land out of trust very quickly. Jim Kaysen, who's deceased now, in the time that we were waiting on getting a Secretary of Interior, was the architect under the Bush era with not taking land into trust. And so Jim Kaysen tried to push through a regulation that would give local control and authority, a veto over land and trust for American Indians. And also with the Trump administration, we see sacred sites as one of the number one. Protection of bears ears was something that came into being under the Biden Harris administration, and that was threatened under the Trump administration. Also at the table, because at the time I was first vice president of the National Congress of American Indians, at the table we were advised that the Trump administration, right out the gate, like within 1 month of being sworn in, was proposing 35% cuts across the board to Indian country. That's cuts to tribal law enforcement, that's cuts to ICWA, Indian Child Welfare, and zeroing out the Johnson O'Malley program. And when you look at those experiences and what is in store for Indian country, they say, if somebody shows you who they are, believe them the first time, versus what we saw under the Biden-Harris administration, and that was record amounts in broadband. I helped to write the formula directly with our vice president for the $1 billion for broadband. And when we were doing that, we identified that there was a shortage. It was far more than $1 billion to close that gap. And she orchestrated another $2 billion. And then in the Rescue Act, that was a tie that she broke the tie. And that ushered in approximately 2% of the total amount that went out to the country went to Indian country. And that was at the time what we understood to be our population, a proportion of the total population, American Indians, 2% of the total, versus 0.3% under the Trump administration. Under the Trump administration, we had a proposed deadline of about approximately 6 months to spend out the CARES Act funding by the time we got the money and the formula was established. And it wasn't going to be possible, and the federal government was going to rescind those funds. But fortunately, there was a change in administrations and also in the Congress, and we got an extension to spend on those CARES Act funds. So there's a really, really big difference, and it matters who's president. But what you're seeing again is some level of distrust of government, and Trump rides that horse and preys on that distrust of the federal government. And we're also microcosms of society, although you can see the issues of choice, and that's still a taboo in Indian country. Because of the effects of the missionaries and pro-life. But when we look at that issue, we look at it in a dichotomous way. It's this or that. And if we were to look at it instead of prevention, I think we would have a very different view. The choice should be a woman's choice. The government should not be telling women what they can and cannot do with their bodies. It should be up to them to decide and talk to their medicine man or their clergy, whoever they rely upon and pray to, and make their own choices, but certainly not the government, which is primarily old white men telling you what you can and cannot do with your bodies. So I think that's the phenomena that you're seeing. I think it's incumbent upon the candidates to demonstrate what they have to offer to Indian country and to be very clear in it. And we are seeing in the last couple of weeks, we're seeing a better display of that, because record amounts of funding to Indian country is wonderful, but at election times it matters if you can relay that information so that tribes know what it is that we got, and individual Indians can know what it is that we got under one administration over the other.
Okay, and thank you very much for that information. And what we're going to now recognize our sponsors.
Chi-miigwech, and thank you to the MacArthur Foundation, Four Directions, and the National Congress of American Indians for your support. This live stream would not be possible without you.
May you young. 100 years ago, Native Americans born in the United States officially became U.S. citizens under the Snyder Act of 1924. So much has changed over the last century. But some things will never change. We've stood firm in our sovereignty and on our treaty rights, firm in our right to exist and in our right to shape a better future.
Our Native vote could be the deciding factor this election. So know that your voice matters and your vote matters. The Native vote in both national and local elections has the power to shape policy, to defend tribal sovereignty, and to protect the next generation of Native leaders.
We have to gear up, show up, and go vote. We can honor our past and protect our future by our voices being heard.
The tenacity and persistence of our tribal nations and our Native peoples has remained steadfast to protect tribal sovereignty and continue pushing for the U.S. to uphold its trust and treaty obligations, all for our next generation. Be part of the legacy of the next 100 years of change for us.
For too long, stories about us were told by others. This election, be part of the story. Exercise your constitutional right to vote.
It's our right to be heard.
It's
your right to vote. For more information on registering to vote and other voting resources, visit nativevote.org.
What a great video from NCAI. Wow. Wasn't that great, Neely?
Yeah, I really think it does a really good job of kind of getting you excited to go out and vote if you haven't already. I know I've already filled out my absentee ballot, but if I was going to go vote again, that definitely would have, really pushed me, motivated me to hit the polls or hit the absentee ballots.
And I have already voted as well because, when you're in journalism, you never quite know where you're going to be on election night. So we're going to move forward now with tonight's live stream, and we're going to bring on Judith LeBlanc, good friend, citizen of the Caddo tribe of Oklahoma, and executive director of the Native Organizers Alliance, a national Native training and organizing network. And Judith, welcome to our live stream. And I love the term that you use, moccasins on the ground. Talk about what you've been doing, what you've been up to since the last time we talked.
Well, it's hard to say what I've been up to because I've been running ahead of a tsunami in Indian country, because the Native Organizers Alliance has 160 moccasins on the ground in 11 states. And we're working with nearly 30 tribes and organizations who are hosting these fellows. And every day I hear a new story, or I visit with some of the fellows who are doing this historic work.
And it looks like you're doing some very fun things, especially in partnership with Illuminative. I saw that on the march on Navajo Nation to the polls to drop off their absentee ballots, Mark Ruffalo showed up. Could you tell us a little bit about that and what it was like to kind of get a group together to go submit their ballots?
Well, the beauty of the work that Native Organizers Alliance and Native Organizers Alliance Action Fund does is that we support our sovereign leadership on the ground and the community organizers and traditional leaders. So we're supporting Allie Young and Protect the Sacred. We have several fellows who are working with her in the various communities to activate the vote. And Allie's work has sent shockwaves through Indian country in 2020 with her ride to the polls. And this year we've been supporting their roller skateboards to the polls, the run to the polls, the ride to the polls. And so they are working in 7 different areas of the Navajo Reservation, and we're supporting their work. Another exciting thing that we've done on the ground is that we know that elections don't solve our problems. They reflect our political power, they reflect how organized we are for the elections. But in between the elections, we're doing the advocacy, we're doing the work, we're doing the thinking and the working to solve the problems in our communities. And so NOA's strategy has been to expand the electorate. Majority of our people aren't registered to vote. So we're expanding the electorate by working with tribes and organization and traditional societies and service agencies to not only register people to vote, but to activate people's understanding of their role. So, for example, we don't just talk about what we need to do. We get people talking about what have they done? What are the needs in the community? So on the Crow Reservation, we have 24 fellows who are working on the ground there. The first thing we did was to sit down with them to make a list. They're being sponsored by the Wyola Community Economic Development Corporation, a new grassroots group in Wyola, which is a traditional place that is called in Crow the Mighty Few. And they made a list of every relative, every coworker, every neighbor, anybody that they've ever known to call. And we came up in the first meeting with 490 names of people that each of the fellows were going to call to start with our families and say, are you registered? Can we drive you to the county courthouse to register? You're already registered? Do you need a ride to the polls now? Early voting? Do you need a ride on election day? And so what we do is we tap into the relationships of trust and love and community, and then we build out from there, because from those 490, we're asking those people to sit with us and call more folks. So you do the math.
So mushrooms out.
Yes.
Yeah, I love that. Hey, Judith, now several states have been going through their voter lists, and some states, some of the numbers are quite huge, like 400,000 plus in some states. Voters, they've gone through and try to eliminate those who've been inactive, dead, which that all makes sense. But are you fearful that some people are being, their names are being deleted from the registration who should not be?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Look, the anti-democratic forces in this country have been organizing for some time now, especially since the 2020 elections, where the Native vote made the difference. And the 2020 elections is what has shaped our approach and strategy at NOA and NOA Action Fund. Our approach and strategy is that we have to guarantee that people have the right to vote. We have to make sure the laws are being enforced. And we also can only do it by activating that broad cross-section of grassroots folks who don't follow the ins and outs of election law. Thankfully, we're partnering with the Native American Rights Fund, who has fought all of the cases and won all of them, all the cases that were taken in order to protect our rights. Because even after 100 years of citizenship, we still don't have equal access to voting on tribal lands. And so not only are we worried about that, but we're taking steps by bringing people to the polls, assisting people at the polls. And if we run into a problem, we immediately call NAF. So for example, I was on Crow two weeks ago, and we heard that the county was denying people the right to vote without a street address. Well, there was a law passed. The anti-democratic forces challenged that law, but NAF won the case to allow people to vote with a post office box or a description of where they lived. No street address. We know in Indian country, many of us don't have street addresses. And so we heard that. So we saddled up and we found two young people, members of a family of one of the fellows, who were not registered, who had tribal IDs with a post office box. And so we went in and we also called NAF. We called Native American Rights Fund, and they are going to be on duty. They are on duty now for early voting. So you can call NAF and get assistance. So we called NAF. We got clarity on exactly what the law said, and she called the Secretary of State. And what resulted was that, yes, we registered, and those two young people also voted. And we also got, NAF got the Secretary of State to send out a memo to instruct all county commissions. So the kind of work that is effective on the ground is to guarantee our rights, to mobilize our people, to guarantee our rights to equal access to voting.
Yeah, I really like that because and we have been trying to message out that people, depending on the state you live in, registration may have closed down, and hopefully it's not too late. But if you live in these states where some states you can vote, you can register the day you can vote, right, up until November 5. But right now, I think there's still time that people who you can go to vote.org, and I actually use that to track my absentee ballot. And I, honest to goodness truth, it took me less than a minute, and I'm thinking more like 15 to 20 seconds at the most to determine that my ballot was received by our city clerk's office and it was recorded as being received. And that made me feel really good because there's so many, especially the right wing, like to push out that you can't trust absentee ballots or this early voting, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm here to tell you, you viewers, use the websites that are available, and there's many times you can go to your Secretary of State's office or go to vote.org, and it's so easy to track, and you can find out if you're still registered. If you're not, either go to the county clerk, city clerks, township, whatever it is, wherever you register, make sure that you're registered to vote. Hopefully there's still time to do that. And that's the mox is on the ground. You know, it's no good if you're not going, if you find out that you're not registered. And then what happens is, in particular, if you moved, even some of us are very highly mobile, right? And sometimes people move one or two times in between elections, and then they're in the wrong precinct, and etc. But you need to check on it right now. Just with your mobile phone, check that. Can't emphasize that enough. And to me, that's part of getting out the vote, is making sure that you are registered to vote, ready to go. And Neely, you've already voted, right? And you're a young person. I want to get that young voice in here to talk about why you voted and you know, your process. How easy was it for you to do an absentee ballot?
Yeah, so usually the last few times I voted in person, and it was fairly easy. But this year, you know, I'm working for Native News Online now as the political editor. And so like you said about yourself, I didn't know where I was going to be on election day, and I wanted to ensure that my vote was cast and my voice was heard. And so I requested my absentee ballot through Michigan, because I'm from Michigan, Michigan's Secretary of State website. And then it got sent to my house. I filled it out, and then I just put it back in its secrecy sleeve, back in its return envelope, and put it in the mailbox and put the little red flag up. And then I checked the website to make sure they received it, and they had. And so now that makes me not as stressed, knowing that my vote's already been cast. I don't have to worry about it on election day. I can just focus on helping others maybe make it to the polls because they didn't do absentee voting, or just kind of, you know, helping where I can, making sure everybody gets out to vote. And so, Judith, my question is I think we all know that change can start in your own household. And so I am wondering what advice you have to those who maybe, have people in their life who aren't sure, who maybe are hesitant to vote. What kind of conversations need to be had, and what kind of advice to those people would you like to give?
Well, number one, go to nativesvote.org, nativesvote.org, to check to see if you're registered, to check to see if you can still register. That's number one. Number two, what we're finding when we're going door to door, be it on the Yankton Reservation, South Dakota, the Crow Reservation, door to door in Phoenix, sitting at tables at powwows in Wisconsin or Michigan, what we're finding is that, number one, there aren't a lot of undecided voters. If you're undecided at this point in the game, then you haven't been paying attention.
Thank you.
So,
Miigwech.
and then the second point is, if the people are just like, well, what does it matter? This is what we say. In Wisconsin, there are nearly, I think, 97,000 Indians. In Michigan, there are 115,000 Indians. You take any state that's a battleground state, our numbers are huge. When you look at percentages, that only reinforces the dominant narrative that we're politically insignificant. But when you look at numbers and the margins in every race from local to national, our votes are critical. In Arizona in 2020, almost the same number of votes that made the margin of victory for Biden was almost the same number of Navajos who voted. Now, I'm not saying that every Navajo voted for Biden, but all I'm saying is that over 10,000 Navajos voted, and I think it was a little more than 10,000 for Biden. But this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with high stakes politics and very slim margins. And that's why, given the Electoral College, the Native vote is decisive. And in fact, when we talk to people and we talk about, when we go to the doors or we're sitting at a powwow, the thing that we say to people is this: one vote doesn't matter. It doesn't, never has, not for communities of color. But when our whole community is organized, when we go in great numbers to the polls, that's what makes the change. That's what makes the shift. That's what brings about an administration like the Biden-Harris administration, who in fact not only recognized tribal sovereignty as a key element to governing, but from the very beginning began to do work through the appointments, over 80 appointments to federal agencies. They began to open the doors of the federal government to have that kind of nation-to-nation relationship that's necessary to make change happen and make it possible in our communities. So we say, don't vote for yourself. You have to vote for our community. You have to vote for, and we've talked to one story of one of our fellows knocked on a door, and the young woman who came was pregnant. And the young woman said, I'm not going to vote. It's too much trouble. And the person at the door said, who was an elder, okay, why don't you vote for your baby then? Why don't you vote
I
for
love it.
those who are coming after us? Because we have a responsibility for those who come after. And frankly, we have a responsibility for our ancestors. Because if you don't vote, we're not going to achieve sovereignty. Because we are not going to achieve sovereignty without a much more deeply democratic political and economic system.
I love
Well,
that, and yeah, that is so true. And when it comes to like the opioid crisis we have in the Indian country, some call it epidemic. I tell people our ancestors did not survive boarding schools, so we can go kill ourselves with drugs. And that's a whole different subject. We're talking about voting today, but I love what you said, equating it to voting for those 7 generations. Vote for those babies that are inside the womb. Vote for those kids yet unborn in in respect and reverence for our ancestors who survived boarding schools, genocide, perpetrated against Native Americans, and becomes very powerful. Our vote in Neely, I think you read it earlier about how Deb Haaland, our Secretary of Interior, the first secretary ever, right, and the secretary in a presidential cabinet, Laguna Pueblo, says voting is sacred, and I love that.
But you know, let's be clear on that. Grassroots Indian country made it possible for Deb to
Yes.
be the Secretary of Interior.
Yes.
We made it. Over 200 tribes, 19,000 people sent the signal to the transition team with a petition and resolutions. We want Deb. And so voting doesn't solve our problems, but organizing our communities do.
Yeah.
So-
And I love the work that you do, Judith, and all credit to many, many years of hard work you have been dedicated to Indian country. I love your passion. Neely, ask her one more question, then we need to close this down.
Of
We'll be
course.
back next
So just
I got to get back to work.
That's right. We
all
gotta
have work that
get
needs
work.
to be done. We can't sit around on a live stream all day. But I was just wondering real quickly, Judith, if you could share with us just what's at stake here in this election.
Well, I think I was very interested by the polling that you've done. We also did polling in partnership with the Illuminative, and it was called the Indigenous Futures Survey. Up on nativesvote.org, you can download the results from all of the key states where the Indian vote is decisive. And what we found, no matter what state, over 6,850 natives from all 50 states were surveyed, and the three top issues, no matter which state, no matter what tribe, urban, rural, the top three issues were sovereignty, economic security, and climate. And so I think the most important thing that we have to be mindful of is that only through organizing can we protect our sovereignty, achieve our sovereignty, save Mother Earth, and ensure regenerative economic development on our lands. Only through collective, organized movement building and power building. And so the elections are an opportunity to send the signal of the power and the concern that we have, not only for our peoples, our communities, our descendants, but for humanity. All of our origin stories talk about humanity. They talk about our role in bringing the medicine that is needed in such a divisive political atmosphere. We agree much more on many things than most people realize. Climate, majority opinion in the country, we need something done. So let's keep that in mind. When we vote, we're voting for majority issues. When we vote, we're voting for humanity's rights, human rights. And when we vote, we are taking a step towards achieving our ancestors' dream of full recognition of sovereignty.
Always good words, Judith, honestly. You always bring very good medicine to any space that you're in. And I want to just say chimigwech to the work that you and your team and all your fellows and everybody else that's volunteering are doing to make sure that our voices are heard.
Thank you.
And let me close this down by saying chimigwech to Dr. Aaron Payment and Judith LeBlanc. We really do appreciate it. And Neely, thank you for the hard work you've been doing all during this election season. And to our viewers, cannot emphasize enough the power of the native vote, how you can make it happen. But only you have to make that decision and develop a plan. I read recently that those with a voting plan actually vote more frequently than those. Well, maybe I will, maybe I won't. Develop a plan right now and say, hey, it's going to take me, and we know this on some reservations, takes time to go vote. Might be a 3 or 4 hour process, which is almost un-American as far as I'm concerned. However, if that's what your situation is, make that plan so you can get that vote. And sorry if you have to take time off work, but this election is just so critical. Make sure you make that plan and go out and vote. Thank you to the sponsors. We appreciate your support so that we can do comprehensive coverage in Indian country. Hey, with us right now, we have a very special guest, and none only than friend and former president of the Navajo Nation, but important for now is he is the congressional candidate for the Democratic Party for the 2nd congressional district in the state of Arizona. And for your information, those who are outside of Arizona may not know, but this is one of the largest congressional districts geographically in the United States. And I understand it's the size of Pennsylvania. And welcome, President Nez. How are you?
Hey, Levi, my friend. Good to be back on the show, and keeping your viewers updated on our race here in Arizona. As you know, vying to be the first Native American to be elected from the state of Arizona to the U.S. House of Representatives.
And you have some exciting news. I caught my eye. Politico ran a article, I want to say Friday, maybe Saturday past weekend, and said you are in a virtual tie with the incumbent Eli Crane. So that's exciting.
Absolutely. We have a tie race here going with a little bit under 2 more weeks to go in this campaign. So we are on full throttle from now to the election. Of course, we've seen, Levi, some new voters from the tribal communities. Out of the 22 tribes, 14 of them are in this district. And I truly believe there's going to be a historic turnout from the tribal communities, not just in Arizona, but all across the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've been doing our best, as you know, to try to energize that Native vote. It's so important. There's a variety of reasons why it's important for Native people to vote, but one of which is tribal sovereignty issues. That our poll that we released today says tribal sovereignty is way up there, one of the top issues, along with sacred sites, water rights, etc. And you're able to. I kind of consider you kind of one of these guys, and people don't always like this term, but it's the man of two worlds. You know how to navigate both as a Native American and as an American, and we are dual citizens. And you go into Congress, you're gonna have to work with both sides of the aisle. You've proven yourself in the past. Even when you were president of the Navajo Nation, dealing with your vice president, Myron Lizer, who is a known Republican. You are a known Democrat, and I was always impressed with that. And so, talk about what how you feel like you'd fit into Congress.
Well, I mean, people are Democrats, yes, and Republicans and independents, but I think the country is right in the middle, Levi, in terms of, wanting something better for their children, their grandchildren, and well into the future. When I've been out in the community, I hear the need for water. Water security comes up as a priority, and I think a priority not just here in Arizona, but all across the West and all across the country. And of course, bringing in the needed infrastructure, bringing in our fair share of resources into our community so that we can improve the quality of life. So it's about the country. It's about each and every one of you out there. Not too much on party, but as I was in office, I worked across the aisle, Republicans, Independents, and Democrats, to get things continue doing in Congress, and not just for Arizona, but for all this country as well. And we have over 500 plus tribes in the country. Just imagine if every citizen was to donate $1 to our campaign. Just imagine what we could do with that in our campaign, because we just aired our first the television ad in a battleground state. It's very expensive to run ads on a commercial, but that's one way to get the message out, especially in a large district like District 2 here in Arizona, into the rural communities, the tribal community. So I ask everyone that's listening, this is a tie race. And, if you can give $1, let's get all the natives to give $1 and our friends to give $1. Just imagine how much we could raise for these final 2 weeks before the election.
Yes. And now I understand that early voting is already taking place. It started on the 9th. So what are you hearing? Are some other parts of the country, it sounds like there's record breaking voting taking place. Is that what the same happening in Arizona, to your knowledge?
Well, I just got an update in Coconino County in a precinct in Tuba City. There were already people in line, people voting the first day, more than before, and almost 200 early voters compared to, 30 to 60 in the past. So there is a lot of excitement, and of course, both parties, Republicans and Democrats, are encouraging their voters to vote early, and then also help, bring people to the polls if you're available on November 5th. So. Again, there's just a lot of excitement. And of course, Arizona is a battleground state, so all eyes are on Arizona and these various states of influence throughout the country.
Now, with this election, it's I understand, like, your opponent, Eli Crane, very, very conservative Republican, has not debated you. Is that a plus or a minus for you at this point?
Well, I think the voters in this district feel like the reason why he's not debating is because he's got not much to report to his voters. This Congress, because of the Republicans that are holding government or Congress hostage, and I'm sorry to say, our congressman is one of those that are right in the midst of this division, and because of that, the Congress is one of the do-nothing Congresses I heard of all time, but I've also heard since the Civil War. So, while they haven't done nothing, of course, that's probably one of the reasons why he doesn't want to debate me, because he's got nothing to show for this year and a half that he's been in office.
Yeah, and before I let you go, I will mention he doesn't even live in the district. And
no, he don't.
Since I first learned about that, I've been doing some research, and apparently, according to the Constitution, they don't have to live in the district. But quite frankly, I'll put my opinion in. That's just absurd. Somebody who's going to represent a congressional district should live in that district, even if it's he's a law-abiding citizen, I guess, technically. However, if you're going to have the interests of your constituents in mind, and when you go vote, you should really be in that district, live in that district, know about that district. And
absolutely. And one last thing, visit our website. We got all the information that you need about our positions, jonathannez.com. You can go there to support us financially as well. And let's take our country back away from the division, from the hate speech, from the anger, and let's start working together as a nation. And
there's a lot of work to be done. If we all roll up our sleeves, and I admire what you're doing. So, Chimigwich, thank you very much, President Nez. We appreciate you coming on and giving us this update.
All right. Thank you, Levi. Take care, everyone. Vote.
This stream is produced by Native News Online with funding support from the MacArthur Foundation, the National Congress of American Indians, and 4 Directions. Chimigwech for your support. Be sure to tune in to part 2 of our Get Out to Vote live stream on October 29th